Yeah. I'm streaming it to YouTube now, Sean, and I'm gonna make you the host.
I think you made the wrong person host.
I did, yeah. Hey, Adia, can you hear me?
Aditya, I think we accidentally made you host. Um, I don't know if you know how to transfer hosts.
Yeah. I'll just check. Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you, Aditya. All right. Okay, I'll get started now. All right. Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Sean Memon, and I will be talking about, oh, okay, let me admit people into the room as they come. Okay. Yeah, I'll be talking about the basic overview of game development, and I will be using Unity as my examples for my examples and how Unity does things, because that is the engine I'm most familiar with. And this presentation, I hope to give you an understanding of why it takes companies years to make games and like all the buzzwords and industry standards for making games. Not necessarily, I won't be going through necessarily how to code and make a game in Unity because that'd be quite long and um, might not be very good on live stream. I feel like videos would be much easier learning resources, but I'll try to provide resources for how to get started. So I guess as introductions about me, I'm currently studying computer science at the University of Texas. I'm in my third year. And as far as my jobs go, I'm currently a web developer at Pecos Solutions doing front end design. And this past summer, I did do an internship at Amazon. So I did learn quite a few like industry standards as far as development goes. And the summer before this past summer, I did work at a research lab at my university where we made a simulation game in Unity. And I learned a lot about game development there too. So as far as stuff I've done, this is just like a big collage of my work. We can see I've done some 3D modeling. There's some renders here. We have some VR game development, which was quite exciting. This one, as you can see here, was had hand tracking involved, and it was basically a project for a hackathon. And I used a hand tracking device on a VR headset to track your hands, and we used that data to predict which American Sign Language you were making with your hand. And so you can see in this image, he's making a C in ASL, which is also looks like a C, and it predicted C. So that was a cool project we made in 24 hours. Uh, and yeah, and then there's some animations I've done, and over here is a 2D game and 3D games. And so continuing on, oh, yep. Let me just minimize this. There you go. Here's some photos of just awards and stuff. I do encourage you all to do competitions. I think it's a really great way to learn stuff. And yeah, that's me. As you can tell, I usually have a beard. I shaved recently. To start the presentation, I wanted to talk about a quote or start with a success story. So this quote says, "A lot of indie developers who became overnight successes were working at it for 10 years." So Dan Adelman, he was a worker in Nintendo, and he was basically saying that game development takes a very, very long time, and it's a craft that you have to hone. So one success story that I really like is of Eric Barone. If you've heard of the game Stardew Valley, it's a very, very popular game with millions of downloads. It's on iOS, it's on Steam. And it's a very, very popular game, and it was made by one person, which is really, really crazy to see. Eric Barone, after he graduated and got a degree in computer science, he didn't get a job. Instead, he spent 4.5 years building this game with no income, living with his girlfriend. And if you can imagine, like, the stress he was going through, not making any income for 4.5 years, and he was just making a video game that could have just flopped and just been a total waste of time. It's pretty crazy. It's like one of the big dreams of mine to make a big game. So he made this game after 4.5 years, and after publishing it, it sold millions, and now he's working on more games, and he's a very successful game developer, I'd say. And if you get a chance, I would recommend playing Stardew Valley. I think it's a really fun game. So, tasks in game development. Also, just to mention, Among Us is the theme for this PowerPoint, and Among Us was also made in Unity, so that's pretty cool. In game development, there's a ton of tasks, which is why game development studios have thousands of employees and take years to make games. And so something I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is the programming, sounds, the 3D art, the 2D art, DevOps, which is development operations, and then something called agile development, and a role in that is the Scrum Master, which I'll be discussing later. So to begin, the programmer. The programmer's main goal is to implement the game logic and connect everything everyone else makes. So he'll take sounds from the sound artist, he'll take 3D models from the 3D artist, 2D assets, 2D UI from the UI artist, and put them together using a game engine, or yeah, basically a game engine. And so that leads to the next slide. Oh. What is a game engine? So a game engine is a tool used to combine code, art, sound to create an experience. And a very famous example of a game engine is the Unity game engine. Another one is the Unreal game engine. There's another one called the Godot game engine. These are all free game engines to use, and that's why they're so popular. But they're not the only ones. A lot of big companies like Ubisoft, they create their own game engines to like specialize the game engine for the games they're making to make their games run optimally. But for normal people like you and me, these engines work great, and they're pretty diverse in what you can create with them. A game engine is not only used to make games, you can actually make simulations and animations in game engines. One time I was doing an animation competition and I used Unity to make the animation, and that was a little hack that made me get an edge off everyone else, because in this animation competition, I only had 8 hours to make an animation, which is an extremely short amount of time. But using a game engine, it was like I just made a game and just recorded me playing the game, and it was an animation. And I did very well in the competition due to that. And so game engines are really good for prototyping, especially Unity. Unity is built for prototyping. Rapid prototyping is very good in Unity. And so you can make tools with Unity, you can make games, simulations. I know companies use it for AR in their companies, like car companies use Unity to show off cars and such. And like in my past job, we use Unity to create a simulation. It's quite useful and quite powerful. And so the first thing in Unity, if you were to use it, is you would have to know how to code. You can't escape that if you're trying to make a game. I guess you could technically escape it. Unreal has a blueprint system where it's a UI. And so you don't have to actually type any code. You just connect nodes together. But I wouldn't recommend that. I would say coding is the best way and the industry standard for things. So different engines use different things. Unity uses C#, Unreal uses C++. Godot has their own script that's similar to Python. And so you just have to know the basics of programming. I know majority of basics of programming, you learn Java first. And C# is literally just Java, just made by Microsoft. It's almost the same thing. So if you know Java, you know C#. And then to learn C++, you're not too far off either. It's usually a difference in syntax and just tiny intricacies. So I'd recommend learning whatever your school teaches. I started with Java and then went over to C#. And yep. And so Unity uses C#. And so I just want to go through a quick run through of how that would work. So this is the Unity game engine. And so you can see this looks quite confusing. There are so many things to look at. There's a project, there's a hierarchy, there's scenes, there's the actual game. And yeah, it takes a while to understand how everything works. But to create a script, all you would have to do is right click here, create C# script. We can call the script test. There you go. And then we can open it up and it'll open the script in an IDE. My preferred choice is VS Code. This is not to be confused with Visual Studio. VS Code is a little different than Visual Studio in that it's lightweight and it's like one of the most popular ones used for programming in general. And so we can see the script here. You can see the class name is the name that I named it in Unity. And we can see two functions, start and update. Now, I'm not going to explain how to code here, but the basics of every Unity script has two functions, start and update. Start runs when the script is loaded, and then update runs every frame in a game. And so to test out the script, we can print something to the console. Unity's way of doing that is called debug.log. And here I can put test start. And then in the game, we can create a random object like a cube and attach our script to it. And then if we press play, oh, there are some errors. Oh, it looks like they imported a random thing. There you go. Give me 1 second.
Capital L, I guess, log.
I'm quite sure it's lowercase.
It is capital.
It is? Oh.
Yeah.
That, okay. You're right. Thank you. Cool. We'll run it. And we got test start. And in an update function, I guess I'll just create a quick movement functionality. So we can just get our objects. I don't know why my autocomplete is so weird. There you go. And then we can move the positions Y by a small number and then set the position. And this script is basically moving the Y position of the object that the script is attached to every frame. And so it says you can't cast from double to float. There you go. And then if you press play, we'll see the cube go up. There you go. And as quick as that, you got some functionality here. So back to the presentation. Coding is really important. I do recommend Brackeys' tutorials. Brackeys is a YouTube channel, and he specialized in creating Unity videos, and he has a YouTube series on how to make a basic game and how to code in general. One other big thing in coding is networking. Networking is very difficult to do, and there are multiple ways to do it in games. So some examples are client server with dedicated server, and that's where we have one dedicated server that handles all the server side data and transmits it to every user. There's also client side server with one player as a server, where we use one player in the game as the server. This is quite unstable, because if that player's connection goes out, then you have to switch the host, and that's a big problem. And there's also peer-to-peer and some more. But the important thing to note is whenever you create a game that is multiplayer, you have to set up the infrastructure to support networking. Like making a single player game is way different than making a multiplayer game, and you have to account for so many more things. And especially if you're making a competitive game, you have to make sure that networking is very fair, because competitive games, without fairness, you don't have a competitive game. And Photon is Unity's one of Unity's solutions to networking that you can use. Recently, they came out with Photon 2, so I think I might get into that. Sounds like a good thing to do. All right, next slide. Another part of game development, 3D modeling. There are many tools to do it. There's Blender, there's Maya, there's ZBrush. Maya's quite expensive, I hear. I haven't really used it, but my choice is Blender. It's open source, it's free, and I think it's really good. They've been working a lot on it, the Blender community. And one YouTube channel that I would recommend to learn Blender is Blender Guru. And one thing to know about Blender, I think I have it open right here, is that it is all shortcut based. And so you would have to learn how every shortcut works, and it is quite complicated, but I think it's worth learning. Especially if you're doing 3D game design, I think it's really important to know at least a little bit of how the 3D modeling part works, because you're going to be working with 3D models on a regular basis. And then to talk about 3D modeling, one important thing in 3D modeling is rigging. After an artist 3D models a model, they have to rig the model, so then you're able to move the model. And that involves applying these bones to the model. As you can see, this model right here has a ton of bones, and it can get very complicated very quickly. And along with rigging, there's a term called weight painting, where each bone, it basically determines how much each bone affects every vertex. So weight painting is actually really important to learn if you're a 3D artist, because you can have weird looking models if you don't weight paint correctly. And then materials. This is how you add color detail to your model. They're quite complicated. This is how you can see in Unity, there's a ton of parameters that materials have. They have a ton of parameters. Albedo is usually the color. Metallic determines like how light affects the material. And there are textures such as normal maps and height maps that also add detail to your material. And so these textures are basically just a ton of images that you apply to 3D models to add color to them. There are high quality textures and low quality textures. And a lot of games I know use low quality textures for objects that are far away, and then high quality textures for objects that are close up to optimize games. And likewise, there's also one thing called LODs, level of detail in Unity. And basically what artists do is they have low poly versions. Low poly means low polygons, less vertices. They have low poly versions of models, and they have high poly versions of models. And as the player gets closer, it interpolates between low poly and high poly. And sometimes you can see that in games. It's quite jarring. So it's really important to master that too. But yeah, that's also one cool thing in game development that I learned. So an example of a texture that's used quite common is a normal map. A normal map looks like this weird blue texture. And basically all it does is add fake depth in the model without using vertices. So if you look at this example, this model right here has about 6,000 polygons. This model has 6 million polygons, and you can see the difference in detail. How this one has so many ridges and wrinkles and such. But then you can see here, this one only has 6,000 and it has quite more details than the one over here on the left. And that's because we have a normal map applied to it. And this normal map just basically calculates the normals of every place on the face and adds detail without actually increasing polygons. And so a lot of high-end AAA games use normal maps on their characters to like give high fidelity in the model without costing high polygons, because this model with 6 million polygons would not run on any computer in a game. It just wouldn't work. You'd be way too slow. Another thing in 3D modeling is unwrapping your models. This is quite complicated. The artist has to basically find seams in the model to cut. For example, in a simple example as a box, if you unwrapped a box like this, the texture would look like something like this, where this is the layout. And then an artist would apply textures to that unwrapped texture, and it would put it on the box. So this complicated model unwrapped looks like this, and you can see the texture being applied and it's on the model. And yeah, that's something pretty cool in 3D modeling. Another important thing is animation. Animation is quite difficult to do, and rigging is very important for animation. As you can see, both of these models have bones attached to them. And how animation usually works is you you basically apply interpolations between places. Like in this example, you don't necessarily move the arm back and forth. You just set a start position and an end position, and the program itself would interpolate the arm through that. And so these animations take a long time, and there are a lot of principles of animations that artists have to learn about. The most important are these 12. Any artist would probably have to master these before getting a professional career in animation. There's a great series called 12 Principles of Animation. If you just Google it on YouTube, you'll find it. And he goes through every single one of these 12 principles. And I think it's very useful to learn these if you want to get into animation, because it just improves the animation by so much. And then the programmer or the technical artist would take these animations and apply them in the game engine. So this is Unity right here. And so you have multiple animations, let's say by your artist, like an idle standing animation, a walk animation, and a run animation. But then the programmer has to connect those animations together to work with the game logic. So if the player isn't pressing any inputs, you want to use the idle state. And then if they, press an arrow, you want to walk in that direction, you want to move the object in that direction and play the walk animation. And maybe if they press another button, you want to make them go faster and play a run animation. And this can get very, very, very complicated. On the right-hand side, this you can see is a lot more complicated on the left. And this is just, I wouldn't even say this is that complicated. It can get way, way, way more complicated with huge games with, hundreds of animations. So that's another skill to learn as a game developer. I know my job about 2 summers ago, we were making a simulation for teachers, and the game was all based in animations, and we had like dozens of characters with all unique animations, and it was a big learning experience, learning how to edit animations and such. And creating animations in game engines, you also need to know how to connect the animations in the game engine. Let's talk about 2D art. 2D art, there's a very cool tool called Adobe Photoshop. I know this one's not free, but it is a really common tool used by many artists. I know there are a ton of free ones too, like GIMP. I know GIMP is one, or Inkscape, but Photoshop is usually the gold standard for like art, or Adobe Illustrator. I have it open also right here. And you can see there's a ton of tools that Adobe Photoshop has. It has a layer system, so you can layer things and such. And this is also like a big learning curve in making UI and just art in general. And yeah, that is a good tool to learn, I would say. I've used it for a very, very long time, and it's come in useful for many things. As far as 2D games go, sprite sheets are pretty common. That is an image with multiple frames of an animation together. And so this is really good because that means all these like individual frames are in a contiguous area of memory, which is very efficient for the computer. And it's also very easy for the artist to like see the animation together. And the programmer can use it to pull, because instead of having 100 of files of like every individual frame of an animation, it'd just be so much easier to just see it all in one image. But then the programmer has to implement splicing, like splicing this image into multiple frames and then using that. Unity has a built-in way to do it. It's great. I would recommend it. And yeah. Another thing is sound. Sound is really important. You probably need a sound engineer on your team, or learn sound design to have a good game. Sound is very underrated, I'd say, but it actually adds a lot of depth in the game. And there's two types, I would say: sound effects and then music. Like sound effects, you want to play when something happens, and then music is just playing in the background, and that could change based on the state of the game. A good music play like editor I've seen is FL Studio. That's actually a quite popular one for making music. I'm not really too familiar with sound. I've only dealt with 2D, 3D, 2D art, 3D art, and programming. But for sound, I know I use Audacity. It's free. It looks something like this. You can record, you can do whatever you want. I use it when I make videos all the time. I would say it's pretty cool. I would use that if I was recording audio. Version control. So version control is very important if you're coding anything. I'd say without version control, you risk losing all your progress. And so version control is the practice of tracking and managing changes to software code. And so this is very quite common in any team, any software development role. You have to learn Git, and Git is basically a language used to communicate with like repositories. Like a very famous one is GitHub. And this is basically like a storage device for projects, and you can track your changes in this repository. And then if you ever make like errors or want to go back, all those changes are tracked, and you can go back to previous versions of your code, and you can collaborate with people together on projects very easily and seamlessly. And in game development, if you're working on a team, you're going to be using version control. I would say the most used one is Git with GitHub, but Unity also has their own version control called Unity Collab. I used it once. One thing to note is it's not free, so but it does work quite seamlessly with Unity itself. I know Git is kind of a learning curve with Unity. It's a little different than normal programming. with version control, because Unity has a bunch of extra meta files and they're just gibberish to read and such. So if you have merge conflicts with your code with other people, it's quite difficult to fix those. Another role in programming is DevOps. This stands for developer operations. And so Amazon's definition that I just pulled says that DevOps is a combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases an organization's ability to deliver applications and services at high velocity, evolving and improving products at a faster pace than organizations using traditional software development. And this infrastructure management process, this speed enables organizations to better serve their customers and compete more effectively in the market. DevOps is pretty important. They have their own role. They're called DevOps engineers, and they're basically trying to improve the productivity of all other developers. Some examples of DevOps is continuous integration. That's a new thing that a lot of big companies are doing now. It's basically whenever you deploy code to production, you run through some cycle where a bunch of tests are ran on the code to make sure no errors occur in the production. And if you're working in any big company, like when I was at Amazon, you're going to see continuous integration everywhere, especially when you deploy, because they want to make sure no code ever breaks. Another thing about DevOps is creating tools to increase productivity. This can be like for level design or just programming in general. Maybe you'll make a tool for artists to use to integrate in your game. The only time I've ever used or created a tool was for level design. And then another thing is just making sure the version control is working correctly and there's no conflicts there. You basically want to make sure all your engineers are happy developing. A big thing now, a big trend right now is agile development. You'll probably hear that in the industry. One thing is Scrum. And Scrum is a framework for developing, delivering, and sustaining products in a complex environment. And earlier in the slideshow, I was talking about a Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master basically is in charge of hearing everyone's changes that they've made recently and what things they're going to be working on next. Basically, how the Scrum process works is you have a product backlog of a bunch of to-dos on a list that you need to get done. And then you have a sprint planning meeting where you pick from the backlog, the to-do requirements on the backlog into the sprint planning meeting. And you basically say, okay, this week we're going to target to do these 3 tasks or these 4 tasks based on their difficulty. And you want to be in reasonable amount of difficulty to be able to finish everything for that sprint. And then all those things from the sprint planning meeting are put on the sprint backlog. And then the sprint lasts for 1 to 4 weeks. And your goal is to finish all the tasks in the sprint backlog. And usually what happens is there's a daily stand-up every day where you explain what you did yesterday and what you're going to do today. At my job at Amazon, we did it 4 days a week. At my job now, Pecos, we do that once a week. It's usually up to the company how they want to do it. But it's very important to have a sprint review and like at some interval basis to, rebase and see where you're at. And you can edit the sprint backlog during these meetings and add stuff back to the product backlog or add more stuff to the sprint backlog based on how everyone's doing. And this basically is used to like speed up development, right? Because if you have a to-do list, you're more likely to get it done than without a list. A very popular one for creating these boards is Trello. It's quite easy to get started with Trello. I have it open right here. Here's an example of when I was working a few years ago. You can create cards and then you can move them. And it's quite simple and it's seamless and you can invite people in. And yeah, I would recommend using Trello as a good starter. I know GitHub also has their own board, which is also good. I've used that before. And in person, I didn't really know this, but in person, usually there's a whiteboard, and people use sticky notes. That's what they use if you're working in person. Usually, I saw that at Amazon. So some new technologies in game development. Virtual reality is very new. It's only been like, I'd say 5-6 years since that was actually introduced, and it's a growing field and it's improving every day. Like the resolutions on headsets now are really good, and the controllers are improving, and the latency is reducing. And if you ever want to get into game development, I'd say virtual reality is a pretty cool way to get started. People think developing games for virtual reality is a lot harder than normal game development. It's actually not the case. It's really similar. The only difference is the camera in the game is the headset, wherever the headset is. But it is quite a wow factor. I know I've had an advantage in some competitions and some game jams just because I was creating a game in VR. So that's pretty cool. Another one is augmented reality. If you've heard of Pokemon Go, that's one of the most popular games in AR. AR is a really growing field. I know a lot of companies like Amazon are using AR to show products to the customer in like how a furniture piece would look in their room using AR. And Snapchat's really big on that too, with their filters and such. And then there's blockchain. Blockchain is actually, I would say, the newest out of these three. Blockchain is basically like cryptocurrencies in games, and it's a growing field. It's like, imagine having a game where the currency in the game could be used in real life. That's an interesting idea that's being tested right now. And there's also something called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and that basically assigns ownership to digital assets. And so you have basically like a contract that says, I own this digital asset, and that can be used in games to own, like a sword or something like that. And then you can sell that sword, sell the ownership to that sword using NFTs and gain cryptocurrencies. But I haven't really seen much big games with that. I think it's really, really new right now. With game development, I'd say how to get started is choose a category. Like you want to either do programming, 3D, 2D, sound. I started with programming and then moved into 2D and 3D. And I haven't really touched sound way too much, but I usually just download assets online. And then you just want to make things. I mean, that's how you learn. You just make things, compete in game jams, compete in hackathons. They really test your rapid prototyping, I'd say, in game jams. And join communities. If you're at your school, I know a lot of schools have their own communities. At UT, we have a game development club that hosts game jams and hosts like game development sessions that are pretty cool. Discord is a great resource for joining online communities for game development. I know Brackeys has its own server where people join and talk about game development, and Brackeys hosts game jams online too that are really popular in the gaming industry. And learning resources. You could always download assets from the Unity Asset Store. I have assets right here, or the asset store right here. And there's tons of assets here, from 3D tools to 2D tools to textures to animations, audio, everything. And one thing you could also do is make things and put them on this asset store to make some money. Like these assets, like you can see, are actually worth cost a lot of money. There are a lot of free assets too, but if you want something that's actually like professionally made, you're probably gonna have to pay a little bit for it. And vice versa, you could make something really nice and sell it and actually make quite a bit of money. Someone wants the link for joining. I'm not sure where that is. The Eventbrite. Will, do you think you could send that?
Yeah, I'll send it.
All right. Yep. But yeah, asset store is a great way to see models, use them in your game, If you buy it, you can use it, usually royalty free without any credits, or maybe some credits. It really depends up to the creator of that asset. Another thing is learning the basics. A good learning resource for learning the basics of game development is Brackeys. He doesn't upload anymore, but he was a really big influencer in the Unity and just Unity in general. And he has a lot of playlists. Like he has one right here on how to program in C#, where he goes through okay, yep. And yep, he goes over all the basics of programming in C# and how to get started. And then he also has one on how to make a video game, where he makes a simple game in Unity from scratch. And we could see that here, what it looks like. Let's just go to the end. And this game right here has a basic score system, levels, movement, input, all the basics in game development. And it's actually a really good tutorial. You can see it almost has 1 million views. And I'd say it's a really good beginner's resource. Another one for 3D modeling is Blender Guru. He explains how to use Blender. I have that here, and he has some popular uploads. The most popular one you'll see is like the creating a donut. It's quite like a popular series that people talk about, and he explains Blender very well, and he's very, very good at teaching Blender. Another one is like just watching fun videos in game development. I thought that was a really cool thing, like the rise of game developers on YouTube. Like Danny, he creates some really, really funny videos on game development, and I think it just inspires people to create more games. And likewise, there's another guy named Sebastian Leg, and he makes some crazy like games in Unity, like solar systems, terraforming, ant simulations, chess AI, portals, voids, clouds. He has some really crazy projects that he works on, and it's quite inspirational. And yeah, you should also connect with me on LinkedIn and GitHub. Those two are really important in connecting, and yeah, I'd use LinkedIn if I were you. If you're trying to find a job, it's quite essential in that. And I guess I'll start opening the room for questions. Feel free to ask me any questions about game development or anything in general. I'd love to answer anything anyone has to offer. We'll go to the beginning too. All right. Well, if there's no questions, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the beginnings of my game development, just my beginning in game development. Here are some games I made a long, long time ago. These were just some simple games. I think it's a good way to learn just programming in general. This was done in JavaScript, and it's like Pong, and I created like Flappy Bird, basic Flappy Bird. And these are just like simple games. You probably want to start something simple before you go into like, 3D development. Just learning the logic of how games actually are run without an engine, I think is quite valuable. And then I also did some 3D games. One is like right here that me and some friends created back a few years ago with a UI system. And yeah, this game was a quite learning experience. Now that I look back at the code was terrible, but I mean, that's how it just goes, in the beginning. But it was quite a fun game to make. We learned about like animations. You can see this player has animations, it has a camera controller, it has like movement and such. We have a tutorial right here. This was basically a soccer game used with the Wizards that we created for a competition. If anyone's heard of Rocket League, it was basically like Rocket League with Wizards. And basically you had like power-ups and spells, and you could do stuff, and it was actually a really good learning experience. And yeah, that was about everything I had. If anyone has any questions.
I don't know if you already said or not, Sean, but are you working on anything right now?
Currently, yes, I am actually. I'm at UT. I'm in a game technology course, and we're making a game in Godot. That's actually right now. That's what I'm working on. But that's for a class project. And I guess Godot is a little different than Unity. I think I could actually pull it up too right now. I have it on this computer. We just started this project, so it's not too complicated, but I could pull it up. It'd be kind of cool to see. And let's see. Right now, all we've done is a camera controller, and I was working on movement and such like that. And yeah, this game we're thinking about creating is a game where there's a map and there's platforms with colors, different colors, and a UI shows a color, and you have to be on that color by the time a timer ends. And if you're not, you lose. If you are on that color, then your score increments and a new color is shown. It's just a quick, fun game for a class. And yeah, that's currently what I'm doing in terms of game development.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is there I don't know if you mentioned or not, but is there a community or a forum that you recommend for different types of development, or is there one that's kind of all encompassing?
I would say Brackeys is the best. Let me try to find it. Brackeys Discord. Brackeys' Discord community is, I'd say, my favorite. And people are here all the time, just making games and talking about Unity in general, and asking questions. Yeah, if they have any.
Okay, cool. That was great. That's all the questions I have. Does anybody else have something? Feel free to say it out loud or put it in the chat.
Yeah, feel free to chime in.
So I think this is probably gonna wrap up our presentations for the next few weeks. But if you signed up for this event, you'll get a notification every time we put a new one up. So I imagine 2 or 3 weeks from now. It'll also be up on YouTube. So y'all keep an eye on it, like it, and join again next time. Thanks, Sean.
Yep. Thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you.
Yep. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, Sean. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. What was that? Do more things certified? I'm not sure what you mean. Do you think you could explain a little more? I see Vivek, your hand is raised. Oh, do more live sessions? Oh yeah. We're taking a break now, but I think the next session would probably be like actually making a game in Unity. The only thing about that is you have to actually know how to code. But yeah, I'd like to create some more live sessions about making games. You can I'm pretty sure you will get an email if since you signed up for this one for any future live sessions, but you can also follow our Instagram. Let me post a link to that. And on our Instagram, we post every single time we have a live session about anything. We've had live sessions on like web development, Scratch, and Python. You can join us. You can follow here, and you'll get a post every single time we have a new session. As far as free courses, I don't think we have any, but I'd really recommend Bracky's. His courses on YouTube are the best. Yeah. Certified, they don't have any certifications on them since they're just YouTube videos. I don't really know anything about certified courses for game development. I know Amazon has their like cloud courses, and those have certifications for them. But as far as game development, I'm not really too familiar with certifications. I'd say if you want to prove to someone that you know how to make a game is to have a portfolio. Just like the art, like my slide that I showed my work. I think if you show a recruiter like your work, that's how they'll know. Android photography, no, unfortunately not. I haven't really dealt with any photography or anything like that. But yeah, thank you for coming. Yep, no problem.